They suppressed that evidence. They suppressed the word getting out. They didn't share information on a timely basis, and they allowed over 5 million people to leave the Wuhan area. That in itself contaminated the rest of the world very rapidly. They should be held accountable on that. But the secrecy that they have gone on, and the way that the WHO, Secretary Tedros of the WHO, the way he placated China and says they're doing a great job, they've contained this, didn't call it a pandemic for 2 weeks when he should have. Those are the types of things that China needs to be held accountable for. And I think you're going to see that happen in several different ways. One is it's very evident that the supply chain, not just with the United States being dependent on China, but a large portion of the world, especially when you come down looking at the APIs, which are the active pharmaceutical ingredients in the medicines that everybody takes, 80% of those come directly from China. And that's something that has been a wake-up call on the PPEs. I think what you're going to see, I know you're going to see a rapid switch of APIs or the supply chains on so many things that China is producing that their economy is dependent on. You're going to see them to go to trusted allies. In fact, we wrote a policy paper. It's called Manufacture the ABC Method. And that's manufacture anywhere but China. Because anytime you buy a product from China, it's empowering their economy and it's empowering their military. And to understand what China is trying to do, you need to read Michael Pillsbury's book, The 100-Year Marathon. Their goal is to be the lone superpower of the world.
And if you want to talk foreign relations, Congressman Ted Yoho, a good person to do that with.
Donald Trump, regardless of what he does or has done, what they can't fault him on is what he has done with China. This is a situation that through neglect, ignorance, or dereliction of duty over the last 40 to 50 years has risen to the level it is now. Donald Trump is the only president that has taken China head on, and I am glad he is at the helm, because what he is doing is exactly what needs to be done. They need to be called to task. You know, when you understand what China has done, they've cornered the market on rare earth metals, the vitamins and minerals that go into our animal feed and livestock feed come 100% from China. Even the trace elements that go into our fertilizers for our farm products, 100% from China. Their goal, like I said, is to take over the world. They're building 5 aircraft carriers, and President Trump is the only one that has woken up the rest of the world on this, and they're finally starting to see that we have to pivot from China, and that's why it's so important. When you buy a product, it's going to be hard, but you can find them. Buy a product from anywhere but China, Taiwan, Vietnam, anywhere. And if we do that, the economic engine that keeps China going in the direction they are going, they'll have to rethink what they want to do. And we don't want a conflict. We just want to participate and be a peaceful nation.
When you talk about
his ban on the travel and blocking people from coming in was what needed to be done. And it needed to be done sooner, but I'm glad he did what he did. Actually, he did it pretty quick. As far as the students, a third of the foreign students in the United States of America come from China. That in itself is okay. The problem is they are indebted to the Chinese government. They have social monitoring scores here in the United States. They have people that are loyal to the Communist Party that are reporting on students that don't follow the Communist Party line here in America. And so I think that's a big problem. The other thing is China has got what they call the 1,000 Talents program, where they're paying students to spy on research and development. They're paying our professors, as you've seen with too many of the professors, the one from Harvard, which is a big black mark on the Harvard institution. And so President Trump, and I think what you're going to see is you're going to see a rollback of these visas to where there's not so many Chinese students coming over here, and they'll be closely monitored in the programs they are, and they may be limited into the engineering programs that they so desperately want.
Highland Park, New Jersey. This is Jim, a Democrat. Good morning.
Good morning to you, and thank you for taking my phone call. I am going to take this this situation in another direction, if I may. I firmly believe, and I hope that the world community that is the United Nations and all of the countries that comprise the UN would take this issue seriously concerning China and expel them from the UN Security Council and reinstate Taiwan, who was one of the original members of the UN Security Council, reinstate them on the UN Security Council. And maybe, just maybe, the UN could expel China altogether from the United Nations.
Jim, that's music to my ears. I mean, you are so right about that. If you go back to when the sanctions were put on North Korea, there's 6 permanent members of the UN Security Council. There's 15 members altogether. All 15 members voted unanimously to put sanctions on North Korea for the proliferation of nuclear weapons. Do you know who the biggest breakers of that sanctions are? It's China and Russia. The UN has no policing authority, no way to hold a member accountable. And I think your point is exactly what needs to be happening. If the members of the Security Council don't follow through on their commitment, they don't need to be on the Security Council. And this is something we've talked to with Secretary Pompeo, other parts of the State Department, with the administration, and we've talked with the UN on this. They need to be held accountable. If not, they're not working to create a peaceful world. They're creating a world that's favorable to China, and this is not helping anybody. Thank you for that comment.
Bobby on Twitter with a question for you. What authority has the U.S. to dictate China's relationship with Taiwan and Hong Kong? What other nations would go along with sanctions on China?
The relationship is they're free to have any relationship. The problem is when you have a country like China that is forcing other countries to break diplomatic ties with China or with Taiwan, I have a problem with that. That you talk about bullying. They go around the world giving money to these despot dictators or these weak economy countries. And they said, if you break the ties with Taiwan, Taiwan's a country of 23 million people. They're a Western democracy. And there's an agreement that was made under President Reagan that they are going to be, well, we're going to honor the so-called one country, two system, which is a fallacy. That was a mistake under Jimmy Carter administration. But there was never this so-called consensus on a one country, two system that came out in '92. And at that meeting between the people of Taiwan and China, there was a meeting, there's an agreement, there was a meeting, and there was an agreement that there was one China, but it differed in the definition of that on the Taiwanese side and on the Chinese side. And so we're just trying to get China to follow through on commitment and not take over a sovereign nation that should stand on their own. And, I think that's something the whole world should be involved in because, what's at stake here is a Western democracy. That's our 11th largest trading partner. And, we've got such a strong Taiwanese diaspora in America. And keep in mind that President Tsai, who just got reelected, had the largest election victory ever in the history of Taiwan. And it was on a pro-Taiwanese platform. And the people of Taiwan want nothing to do with China as far as the Communist Party. They identify as Taiwanese, not Chinese, and Chinese is trying to rewrite history as they've done so many times, and it shouldn't be tolerated by anybody.
Down to Texas. This is Alex, a Republican. Good morning.
I was going to ask Representative Yoho, is the House working on anything to counteract communist influence in the United States?
There's all kinds of stuff going on that, Alex. You bring up a good point. There's a auto glass company up in Dayton, Ohio. That was a failed company. It was bought by a Chinese entity. What people need to understand, and I would have all of your listeners here, John, to look at that documentary that President Obama put out, and I think it's on Netflix if I can promote something, and it's called American Factory. This is exactly what's going on all over America. This Chinese person comes here, buys a factory. Everybody thinks, oh, he's just a wealthy Chinese person. What they don't understand is that person would not be allowed to come into this country without the blessings of the Chinese Communist Party. On his board of directors, and he is a member of the Chinese Communist Party, his management team, after they got rid of the American management team, are all Communist Party members. And they're doing this around the country. And this is something that it's like a Trojan horse coming in here. It needs to be stopped. And we need to prevent these companies from coming in. You brought up another good point. If you look at the agriculture sector of America, China has bought the largest pork producer in America, and they control a processing plant. It's Smithfield Pork. And this is something that's detrimental to our national food security. And I think we need to look at that. You're spot on Taiwan. The rest of the world needs to open up diplomatic relationships with Taiwan if they see the reason to do that. Myself, we're calling for full diplomatic relationships with Taiwan and not hiding under this vagueness of a one country, two system. That is, it's a fallacy, and it's something that's eroding, and you're going to see an independent Taiwan, and I look forward to standing with those.
Are we allowed to sell Taiwan weapons right now?
Yes. They have to be defensive weapons, and President Trump just had an agreement, I think it was $10 billion worth. And, you know, one of the things that China is scared to death of is our THAAD system. And I've recommended that. And in fact, I told that to one of the defense ministers from Taiwan or from China that if you keep this aggression, and keep in mind what they're doing in the South China Sea, they've militarized that. They're going around the world militarizing bases in foreign countries, even though they say they're not, we know they are. And, you know, when I brought up Taiwan, their encroachment in the South China Sea, I told him I think it's time that we sell Taiwan the THAAD system. And it was a very violent reaction he had. But it's something that tells me that they understand that we're not playing around with this, and they need to find a way diplomatically to be inclusive of Taiwan, not to take them over.
Less than 10 minutes left with Congressman Ted Yoho. This is Annette out of Albany, New York, a Democrat. Good morning.
And how you doing?
I'm doing all right. Go ahead. You're on with Congressman Yoho.
My name is Johnetta, and I'm from Albany, New York. And I'd like to ask the representatives, the Republican representatives, why are they delaying funds for us? Why are they letting us starve? And you can sit on TV and talk all of this stuff, but we're starving out here. People are getting evicted. You understand? From their home. People are getting their lives destroyed, and we sitting up here talking about some other countries, and I heard it didn't even come from China. Why are people lying about this disease, where it came from, and why we can't get nobody to give us no help? But
Annette, got your point. Congressman Yoho on the next coronavirus response legislation.
Annetta, you know, I'm sorry for your condition. You need to look at your state and local representatives. You need to look at your U.S. representatives, because they're the ones that should be taking care of you and making sure the people in your district are being taken care of. Nobody in America should be starving. We put so much money into our food programs and our social programs, our re-education programs, that it's unacceptable for anybody to be that way in America. And if you've got representatives that aren't helping you, fire them in the next election. As far as the virus did originate in China. I don't know what you're listening to, but we know firsthand it came out of the Wuhan province in a supposedly fish market or a fresh market. And it's just kind of a coincidence that their most advanced biotech research lab is within about 4 miles from there. There's no doubt this came from China. What we need to do is find out why China allowed that, because this is research that was brought up to me by Larry Tilley and some other researchers. Dr. Larry Tilley is one of the most respected veterinarian researchers in the world. He's world renowned. He came across, they wanted to know why certain populations were being affected, why were old people more affected than the younger population, why females had less infection rate and death rates than the males. And their research brought them across a pivot point where there was a group about 50 years of age and above had more morbidity and mortality at that point, and below it was less. And the interesting thing they found out is in 1971 to 78, measles, mumps, and rubella vaccines were starting to be given on a massive scale around the world. They only attained one vaccine, but from 79 forward, they got 2 vaccines. And so what they were seeing, and they came across a Cambridge study, University of Cambridge, and they found that there's a 30% identical DNA, 29% identical DNA in the protein structures of coronavirus and rubella virus. And the thought is maybe there's some cross-reactivity in protection. And if so, this research can be validated very quickly. And if so, if this is true, can you imagine with millions of doses of MMR, measles, mumps, and rubella vaccines readily available, if this will lessen the severity of the disease or prevent people from going into the hospital and decrease the death rates, would that not be a smart thing to follow up on while we're trying to get a coronavirus vaccine that'll be 6 months to a year and a half away from now? The facts are it came out of China. I mean, there's no question if you go to the World Health Organization, if you go to the different CDCs, not just in our country, but countries around the world, there's no question where this came out. But you need to go back and look at the history of China, of what they've been doing very systematically. Their goal is to be the #1 superpower economically and military, and they want, they're giving people an option of Western democracies or Chinese socialism with Chinese characteristics, which is communism in an Orwellian type of society where they control their people. You know, if you walk across the street and jaywalk, you get a bad score and it affects you. So people are going to have a choice. Do you want to live like Chinese or do you want to live in a free society? And we've got a lot of work to do. I mean, we're not perfect by any means.
Last call for you, Congressman. Alan has been waiting. East Chicago in Indiana, Democrat. Good morning.
Good morning, sir, and thank you for the Wall Street Journal. Love you big time to increase their profits. They're looking for cheaper labor, and China built up the factories, who gave the equipment. They just turned over intellectual property and had stuff made there. You had companies in the United States that only wanted products made for China because they knew they were cheap. They could charge the same, but labor was cheap. They got a huge profit. So there's going to be a profit there. I think most of our consumer goods, as we found out, we can get masks or gowns, I think they're coming from China.
Alan, thanks for the call. Congressman, wanted to give you time to respond.
Alan, thank you. The coronavirus has shown how dependent we are on the supply chain coming out of China. The second point you made, our manufacturers went to the most communist country on the planet to get products made because their tax structure and regulations treated them better than the United States government. We changed that with the American Tax Cut and Jobs Act that President Trump signed into law, and that allowed these companies to come back. And I have met with a lot of these AmCham companies from China, from the Asia Pacific area. They have prostituted themselves out for cheap labor in the name of profits. And they're getting their rear ends handed to them because what they have found, and this comes from the CEOs of these companies,